What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I know it's kind of a weird time for content to be posted, but I need to get a video up. This has been a while since I posted last. I also apologize. I do sound a little congested and I sound a little gross. I am currently battling a cold. So, yay! Also, serious topic, this video will contain trigger warnings for gory graphic details and the death of a minor. If you do not like that or feel like you will be triggered or anything, please click off the video now. Yeah, let's get into it. So today's video will be about the lipstick killer. If you guys aren't familiar with who that is, it is referenced in Criminal Minds. I'd say it's pretty popular in the true crime community. I've heard of him several times, actually. I just now got around to making a video about it. But, so the lipstick killer is also known as William Hirons. He was 83 at the time of his death in 2012. What he was convicted of was 3 murders spanning from 1945 to 1946 in Chicago, Illinois. There are questions of his guilt. We will get into that into a second. And the question for this video that I want you guys to think about is, do you think Mr. William Hirons was guilty of his crimes? We'll talk about that in a second. He served 65 years in prison until his death in 1945, which I believe was one of the longest he was serving one of the nation's longest prison sentences at the time. He was also the first prisoner in the state of Illinois to earn a degree from a 4-year college while he was in prison. So this man was incredibly smart. He was incredibly gifted in a lot of things. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to dive into this man's life. And I am going to rip it apart. So we're going to talk about his early life. So his full name is William George Hirons. He was born on November 15th, 1928 in Evanston, Illinois. His father's flower business failed and the family was constantly on the edge of poverty. Like, this man, he knew what struggles was. William had stated in interviews that his parents fought frequently and he robbed other homes to relieve his tension that he felt. He didn't try to sell the items that he stole. So he was a very skilled burglar from all of the research that I've known. Like, actually how he got arrested was he got busted for stealing from another home, which we'll get into. Hold on. My research is kind of everywhere, so we're gonna I'm scrolling real quick. So like I said, his early life gave no indication that he would grow up to be a murderer. He was a petty thief since he was a child, but he had no history of violence. He was born literally on the eve of the Great Depression. So he grew up in a very, very rough time. He started to wander the streets in forms of entertainment, which often came in the form of petty theft. So he would steal to entertain himself. He was working at a grocery store at the age of 12. He accidentally shortchanged himself with a customer. To make up for it, he stole a single dollar bill from an apartment by reaching of the crack of a chain door. From there, he graduated to stealing larger sums and later personal items. Eventually, he had himself a small collection of pilfered items that ranged from the expensive to the mundane, like cameras, cocktail shakers, guns, and even handkerchiefs. So this man, I admit, was incredibly brilliant. He was very gifted, all of that. At 13, he was arrested for breaking into a local building's basement, the first in a long string of arrests that would garner him the reputation of being a nuisance with the Chicago police. Although he was not described, not yet, as anything more. So he was just a nuisance who liked breaking into places. Again, like I said, not really any indication that he was a violent person. He described his theft as a hobby, with something that kept him busy as his parents were fighting. He was eventually sent to a boys' semi-correctional school in Indiana. However, his time there proved ineffective, as he was arrested again afterwards. At this time, the court recommended he be sent to a private institution in central Illinois. While ineffective at curbing his crime streak, the schools were good for one thing. At both institutions, he proved himself to be an impeccable student and earned top grades in all subjects. So good were his grades that before he was even 16, he qualified for courses at the University of Chicago as part of a gifted students program. In 1945, by the time he was 17, he had enrolled in courses and was hoping to become an electrical engineer. So like I said, this man, brilliant. However, not even advanced courses, involvement in extracurricular activities, rising popularity, or a string of girlfriends could supposedly stop William Hirons from reverting to his childhood hobby, and eventually something more sinister. Or so we thought. Alright. So, let's go back up here. So we're going to start with the 3 murders. So now that we've covered his early life, like I said, there was no indication that he was really, really a violent person. He was brilliant, just a thief. And personally, I'm not sure if he did it. Like, normally I feel like, in my personal opinion, that I'm 100% convinced. And this time, I'm not sure. But I'll lay out all the evidence for you and you guys can decide. Okay. So, the crimes, we'll start with the first one, took place in June of 1945. Her name was Josephine Ross. She was 43 and she was found, I believe, stabbed and her throat was slit. I believe. Okay, hold on. Yeah. So, okay. In June of 1945, and didn't even make the front page of the local newspaper, was 43-year-old Josephine Ross had been found in her home dead from multiple stab wounds to the neck. A skirt had been wrapped around her neck and her wounds had been taped shut. Police interviewed her fiancé and several ex-boyfriends, all of whom had alibis. So this guy was like, not impeccable, but I'd say pretty, or I don't know. I can't think of the word right now. It was determined that Ross had been killed by an intruder, likely one who was there to burgle her, but who had been surprised to see her before they were able to complete the robbery. As nothing was taken, police assumed that after killing Ross, the suspect had fled. However, that was not the end of the assumptions, as nothing further had been found at the scene. There were a few dark hairs found clutched in Ross's hands, though they only led police far enough to guess they were looking for a dark-haired suspect. So again, this is back in 1940s when their technology was not nearly as good as ours. So, yeah. As there were no suspicious characters reported at the scene, no witnesses, and no noise disturbances reported, it seemed for the time that the Ross murder would go unsolved. That is, until 6 months later, when William Hirons committed his second murder, the one that would become the hot topic of Chicago and kick the police investigation into high gear. On December 11th, 1945, 32-year-old Frances Brown was discovered savagely murdered. Like the Ross murder, Brown's head was wrapped, this time in towels. Also like the Ross murder, there was a startling lack of evidence in the apartment. The police found no fingerprints, no evidence of a burglary, and no hint of who the murderer could have been. There was, however, one glaring clue left for the police. The strange message scrawled on the living room wall in Brown's own red lipstick. And this quote, we have all heard this one before. For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself. And that is how the media dubbed him the lipstick killer, because it was written in her own lipstick. Which, like, damn, man. I can't imagine. I want to make sure that was the full quote. Just doubling to be sure. I believe that is the full quote. Yeah, for heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself. And that is just like, it's all over the place. Like, I knew that when I was like 11, is when I first heard that quote. So this is when the media picked up the case and splashed it across the front page, branding the culprit as the lipstick killer. Of course, thus far, the lipstick killer was nameless, a unidentified man or woman, as the police once insisted, on a silent rampage through the streets of Chicago. For just short of 1 month, the city was held in sensationalized terror, egged on by the Chicago newspapers, which waited with bated breath for the next horrific crime scene to be discovered. Within the first week of 1946, it finally came, when William Hirons, still an unknown and unsuspected, committed his final crime. And in my opinion, and probably a lot of people's opinions, was the worst one. And this is where the trigger warning comes into effect for the death of a minor, because his last victim was a 6-year-old girl. And her name was Suzanne Denegan. If anybody knows how to pronounce that, let me know if I pronounced it wrong. Around 7:30 on the morning of January 7th, James Denegan discovered that his 6-year-old daughter Suzanne was missing from her bedroom. Police swarmed the home and immediately began a search of the upscale Chicago neighborhood. In the Denegans' home, a crumpled ransom note was discovered in Suzanne's room, which demanded $20,000 from the family. It also listed orders not to involve the police and claimed more orders would follow. As police doubled their search, they discovered the ransom note was nothing more than a ruse. 12 hours after she was reported missing, 6-year-old Suzanne Denigan was found dead. I hate doing cases like these, only because they make me want to puke. Around 7 p.m. that evening, Suzanne's severed head was found floating in a sewer near the Denigan home. The ribbons that had been tied in her hair that morning were still in place. Before long, her legs and torso were also discovered in nearby sewer basins. I've been told from my research that it took them weeks to find the rest of her body. Once again, Chicago was caught up in a horrific but captivating crime, though the police had yet to officially connect it to the murders of the lipstick killer. The public waited to see who would be arrested, but it would be almost 6 months before an arrest came. So, as the Chicago police investigated the Denigan kidnapping and murder along with the Ross and Brown murders, William enjoyed the life as a young playboy at the University of Chicago. As June 26th rolled around, Hirons was at the top of his game. He had recently celebrated an uncle's safe return from the war, was taking ballroom classes, and had developed an interest in playing chess. He was even in the midst of a budding romance with a classmate whom he had planned to take on a date that night. He just needed some extra cash. And this is where it got him in trouble. William Hirons originally planned to cash a savings bond for $1,000 at the post office, which he usually procured through theft. Unfortunately, the post office was closed when he arrived. This was no matter to him, as it had become second nature to him. Hirons reached into an open apartment door in the same upscale neighborhood where Suzanne Denigan once lived. But the tenant of the apartment spotted him, and as he fled, he was followed by 2 policemen. Cornered, he pulled a gun from the back of his jeans, one he had claimed to pack in case he was mugged while carrying the bond, and turned it on the 2 officers. Again, another action that would get him in trouble later on. Discrepancies have been found between William Hirons' account of the arrest and that of the 2 police officers. The officers claim that Hirons fired at him, and Hirons claims that the police shot first. Whatever the case, shots were fired and Hirons fled. A chase ensued which culminated in an almost comical apprehension. An off-duty police officer, still in his swim trunks from a day at the beach, stopped Hirons in his tracks by smashing a stack of flower pots over his head and rendering him unconscious. That is like straight out of a cartoon. That's so funny. I'm sorry. Oh, my friend's snoring. I gotta get her in bed pretty soon once I'm done here. While his arrest was unpleasant, William Hirons would come to realize being hit on the head with a flower pot was the most pleasant things he would experience for a long while, as some of the next few days would prove to be some of his worst days of his life. After his head was stitched up, he was transported to the Cook County Jail. There, he was subjected to a torturous interrogation, during which he slipped in and out of consciousness due to pain, drugs, and exhaustion. So, from what I'm learning, when he was being interrogated, he wasn't in the right state of mind, which could possibly mean he was coerced into his confession, which would explain why he recanted it in later years. After naming him as the suspected lipstick killer, the police searched his room at the university, his parents' home, and a locker he kept at a local train station. In the locker, they found evidence of his lifetime hobby of thievery, and after taking his fingerprints, discovered that they were a 9-point match to those found on the Denigan ransom note, a fact that would later be disputed. Despite these facts, William did not confess to any of the 3 murders, much to the police's dismay. In an effort to get him to admit to at least one of them, police enlisted the help of several nurses and one doctor to revert to sinister methods. During one interrogation session, a nurse poured ether on Heron's genitals while he was strapped to a bed. During another, a police officer repeatedly punched him in the stomach while chanting the details of the Denigan murder in an effort to spark recognition into him. Several days into his interrogation, a spinal tap was administered in an effort to force him into confessing to being the lipstick killer. After the spinal tap, a polygraph was ordered, but Hirons was in too much pain for an accurate reading to be assessed. One doctor even injected Hirons with sodium pentanol, which was known to be the layman as a truth serum, though it did nothing more than put him into a semi-conscious delirium. Okay, so kind of going over all of the information that I just told you, it seems like the police were so desperate to catch the lipstick killer, which is understandable, that they were literally torturing him in interrogations, which is understandable as to why he confessed to it. He stated he was beaten and given truth serum in a disputed he disputed the claims, saying he was about to sign a confession in exchange for 1 life term. So basically, I feel like he was basically being tortured, and he confessed to save his life. After 4 days of this, he began to mutter the beginnings of a confession, while under the influence of the sodium pentanol solution and hovering somewhere between excruciating pain and unconsciousness. Hiron spoke of a man named George who could have potentially committed the murders. Police searched for George and questioned Hiron's friends and family, but ultimately came up empty-handed. The fact that Hiron's middle name was George ultimately led to believe that the statement to be a somewhat confession of the lipstick killer. So, I don't know how to feel about this. I'm starting to think that he was not guilty. Only because of the fact that if he was, I'm starting to think not. I think that the police were so desperate to catch this killer and pin it on somebody, and I mean, understandable. This was a very scary time for the people of Chicago, but they were desperate, and desperate times led to desperate measures, and they literally tortured this poor man for 4 days before he confessed. Despite the fact that William Heron's handwriting did not match the note left on Francis Brown's wall, and the fact that the police only had 9 of the 12, FBI required 12 points of identification to deem fingerprints 100% match, and the fact that Hiron's confession was disputed by several nurses, the police ultimately charged William as the lipstick killer. On July 12, 1946, 17 days after his arrest, he was indicted for assault with intent to kill, robbery, 23 counts of burglary, and 3 counts of murder, despite the fact that the interrogation was clearly botched. Not to mention, all of his places of residence had been searched without a warrant. Unlawful search. It was clearly botched. People disputed his claims. Literally. The police fucked this up. And that is annoying. Like, this man, it's obvious to me now, at least in my opinion, I don't think he was guilty. I think he did it to save his life, even though he says he didn't in interviews, supposedly. I think he did it to save his life, and I completely understand that. Hirons agreed to a full trial, even though he risked death by electric chair. The thing is, once you're dead, there's no clearing things up, he said, looking back on his arrest in a 2008 interview. When you're alive, you still have a chance to prove that you weren't guilty, so I was better off being alive than being dead. Ultimately, after the state's attorney offered him a deal of 3 consecutive life sentences, Hirons pled guilty to all 3 charges. Later in life, he would only do so because he feared for his life and was afraid of what happened should he turn down the deal. Now, I found supposedly another suspect. So I have to scroll back all the way back up because that was at the top. So, hold on. I have like 32 pages of research right now. So this is fun. I didn't format it or anything. Okay. And also, I want to admit that by the time of his death, much of the evidence was discredited. So he should have been at least given a chance. At least maybe clemency. And what clemency is, in legal terms, if you guys don't know, is the process in which a governor, president, or admin board may reduce a defendant's sentence or grant a pardon. And if most of the evidence that they used was discredited, according to a historical society, no evidence was presented to connect him with Ross. A attorney at the Northwestern University on wrongful convictions argued not only did Hirons' confessions not match basic facts of the crime, but physical evidence was also very lacking. So police found a fingerprint at Brown's apartment, which they initially said did not belong to Hirons, but by trial time, they testified that it was his. So they lied, essentially. Later, it was proved not to be a match. Handwriting experts also determined that the penmanship found on the Dennigan ransom note did not match Hirons, and neither did the infamous lipstick message. So there are 3 pieces of evidence that could throw this case out. Somebody reach out and try to get his name cleared, because, like, even though he's been dead, it could still bring his family justice. Well, not his family. He doesn't have any survivors, unfortunately. He also took 2 lie detector tests. At that time, the investigators ruled the results as inconclusive. The researchers later discovered that they showed he was being truthful. Today, researchers generally agree that lie detector tests are not scientifically supported. So, the lie detector tests that they said proved he was guilty were false. The penmanship of the note and the message on the wall did not belong to William, and the fingerprint did not belong to him. So while his fingerprint and the fingerprint on the note was more than likely not to be his. So, and the other suspect said evidence pointed to another man, Richard Thomas, who had been dismissed by police as a suspect despite confessing to the Dennigan murder. Thomas was a nurse who Drizzen said had the medical knowledge necessary to dismember a body. He also had a history of sexual abuse against his daughter and had been convicted of extortion and attempted kidnapping. In that case, a ransom note was used. Drizzen said his experts believed Thomas's handwriting more closely matched the ransom note found at the Denegan house. Thomas had been in the Chicago area at the time of the murders and had confessed to the crime to police after he had wandered to Phoenix. Once Hiron was caught in the vicinity of the Denegan house in the attempted break-in, Thomas was no longer a suspect. So, now that I've laid out all of the things for you, let's recap. So, William Hirons was a burglar, showed no history of being violent. All of the evidence that was used at his trial was later discredited. He was tortured, essentially, for 4 days during his interrogation. Claims that he feared for his life, which was the only reason he confessed. There was another man who admittedly reported to Phoenix authorities that he killed Suzanne. His handwriting matched this differently. This is Richard Thomas. Had a history of sexual abuse against his daughter and had been convicted of extortion and attempted kidnapping. So, my question for you, true crimers, is who do you think the lipstick killer was? Do you think it was William, or do you think it was somebody else? Leave it in the description below. I want to know. Bye!